The inspirational messages delivered by Reverend Kevin McCarthy on these videotapes were prepared for general audiences and aired originally as Word and Deed on cable television. Each of these talks is inspired by topics covered in the Unification Principle. Reverend McCarthy conducts educational and guidance programs throughout the world for the Education Department of the Unification Church. This program includes excerpts from Reverend Myung Moon's talks and sermons delivered in the United States of America.
Welcome, everybody. Good to see you tonight. One question that people ask me a lot, and maybe you've asked yourself this question, how is it possible that man could fall away from God? After all, doesn't Genesis 1:27 say very clearly, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, God created man. Male and female, he created them. So how is it possible that man, created in the image of God, could become so messed up? Have you ever asked yourself that? How is it possible? Here we are, supposedly the highest creation of God, and we're so messed up, and look at our history, and watch the evening news and all the things that we see. How is it possible that God's image could become like this? One thing we know, the way man has become certainly isn't the image of God. If we go to the natural world, if we go out into the creation, for instance, if you've ever been to the mountains in North Carolina, it's so beautiful. And when you're out there in the beauty of creation, you can really feel that God's nature is so beautiful and loving and peaceful. But when we get into the midst of man's world, we see a big difference. That somehow the world, man's society, really reflects so little of what God is. And yet God has created this man and woman as his image. So how is it possible that we see this diversion, that human beings were able to divert from God? After all, we look at the creation, and we have never seen, for instance, a squirrel that deviated from God's way. When you walk through Central Park in the middle of the night, you're not worried about getting mugged by a squirrel, are you? It's the human beings that are the problem. So we look at everything in the creation, and everything seems to work perfectly. We see order and harmony and beauty and wonderful things throughout the creation, but when it gets to us, we're all messed up. So we need to try to understand this tonight. How is it possible that man could divert from the way, and what happened actually? And one thing that we see in common, man and the creation, is that actually, though man was created, we were not created complete or perfect. Now, this doesn't mean that man was created with some flaw in the beginning. But man was created with a potential. And this is a common principle, that nothing is created complete. Nothing is created complete. But everything is created with a certain potential that it must fulfill. And we say that all things must go through 3 stages of growth in order to fulfill their purpose. And in effect, that's what perfection is. What is a perfect apple tree, for instance? A perfect apple tree is an apple tree that bears fruit, fulfills its purpose as an apple tree. That's what perfection is. So all things in creation, the apple tree, for instance, begins not as a tree. It doesn't just come flying out of the sky, apple tree. But it has to go through a growing period. 3 stages of growth. It begins as a seed in the ground, goes through a formation, a growth, and then a completion stage, and then it bears fruit. It's a perfect apple tree. And this is true for everything in the creation, these 3 stages of growth in order for things to fulfill their purpose. This is true, and it's true for man as well. For instance, we can see externally, in terms of the growth of our body, we go through a childhood, an adolescence, and an adulthood. But there's something more to man's growth that we want to talk about. And there's something about man's growth that is really different and unique from the way the creation grows. If we look at the creation, you'll never see anything in the creation deviate from its fundamental purpose. For instance, the bears will always be a bear, will always become a bear and live like a bear and be a bear and do what a bear does. A tree will always follow the way of trees. In that way, you could say that trees are so religious, so righteous, so pure. You know, they follow the true way of the tree. And the rock is certainly the true way of the rock. Every rock is being totally obedient to the way of the rock. And, you know, rocks are so obedient, aren't they? They'll just wait, won't they? They'll just stay and wait and wait and wait. They won't move an inch. You tell that rock, stay there, he'll stay there. That means you can trust a rock more than you can trust some people, right? So throughout the creation, everything is growing because the essence of all things in the creation is what we call the force of principle. The force of principle. The life force of principle is the essence of all things in the creation. So the force of principle is the force within all things in the creation that directs it to fulfilling its purpose. Now, the difference between the creation and man is that this force of principle is not the essence of man. We are not controlled by this force of principle. And actually, I feel a little bit sad about that. Maybe it would be a good idea if God placed within the essence of man this force of principle. And that way, we could fulfill our purpose and there would be no deviation, no sin possible. Good idea, right? Well, it's a good thing for you that I'm not God. Because if that was really God's plan, man would never be able to fulfill his purpose. What is the purpose of man? What is the perfection of man? And we've talked about this before, past weeks. The purpose of man is the perfection of heart. And therefore the essence of man is heart. Our fundamental purpose is to perfect our heart. And this is what God meant when he told Adam and Eve, be fruitful, multiply, have dominion. Perfect our heart. And that when we perfect our heart becomes one with God. The heart of God and the heart of man become one. We call that then the direct dominion. God directly controls man, not by principle, but by love. And before that, God relates to man indirectly through principle. Through principle. So man's purpose is the purpose of heart. That we have a heart relationship with God. So therefore we have to perfect our heart. So now we have a problem. Because in order for man to have a perfect heart, it means that the force of principle cannot be at the essence of man, but instead another force. The force of love must be the essence of man. The force of love. The force of love is the essence of a human being. And our potential to love is the same as God's. the same love quality. God gave us the same potential to experience the same love quality as God himself. But this creates a problem because the essence of man is love. And yet man has to perfect his heart. But what's stronger if we compare these two forces? What is stronger, the force of principle or the force of love? Force of love, oh my goodness. The force of love is maybe, 100 times stronger than the force of principle. It's stronger. So God has a problem here. How do I direct a stronger force with a lesser force? In other words, the force of love, man's heart has to follow this way of principle. It's the way of principle that guides all things to their fulfillment. So how can this way of principle, a fundamentally lesser force, direct a greater force? The answer is it can't. It's impossible. The reality is, if we're just dealing with these two forces, then the nature of love is to divert from this way of principle. It's the nature of love to divert from this way of principle because it's a stronger force. This is why God did something. God did something about this situation. And you know what he did? He gave man a commandment. Now, God didn't just give this commandment just because he loves giving commandments and seeing man grovel. Oh, yes, yes. But he gave the commandment for a specific reason. And that is because man needs another power here in order to harmonize these two forces. We need another power. And this is faith. Faith. The power of faith. So God introduced the commandment, which was, do not eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, or you'll die. And if you were with us earlier in the series, we studied very clearly that the meaning of the fruit is this premature love. Premature love. So the commandment that God gave was, don't go the way of multiplication before you go the way of fruitfulness. In other words, perfect your heart before you consummate your heart with each other, between Adam and Eve. So he introduced this commandment so that man could then relate to the commandment in faith. Faith. If man could relate to the commandment in faith, and this is why God didn't explain it. He didn't explain clearly, he just gave a commandment so that man could relate to this commandment in faith, and thereby producing the power of faith, or the force of faith. Faith is a very strong power. Jesus said that the faith the size of a mustard seed can move a mountain. So if man could have faith in the commandment, then man's heart could perfect itself. Man's heart could follow the way of principle and be fulfilled, be perfected. So there's another reason then why God did it this way, and that is because, again, man's purpose with God is a love relationship. And in order for a love relationship to exist, there has to be two important elements. One is freedom, and the other is trust. Trust. So God could not dominate man and guarantee that man would just grow to perfection. But God orientated himself to man based on trust, a trusting relationship based on freedom and based on giving man a responsibility. You know, when you trust someone, you're giving that person a responsibility to be true to your trust. And this is how God related to man, in trust, not by power, but by trust. Because ultimately, the ultimate destination is a love relationship. a love relationship between God and man. And if you've experienced love, you know that without freedom and without responsibility and without trust, there is no such thing as a love relationship. So between man and God, those three things were important. Man had to have freedom, and man had to have freedom because man was created to be a giver of love. Can you love somebody that says, hey, love me right now? You must love me right now. Love is something you can't demand. Love can only come in an environment of freedom. So man needed freedom in order to grow his heart, in order to develop in love. Secondly, if man's going to have freedom, and it's going to be true freedom, then man needs responsibility to maintain that freedom, to be true, to be responsible for that freedom. And if man is going to be responsible, then man needs trust. It has to be a trust relationship. So for love to exist, those three things are important: freedom, responsibility, and trust. So God gave man a responsibility in order to remain a free being. God gave man the responsibility to have faith in the commandment. So God didn't do it all. God gave man a responsibility for his own self-perfection. And this is the difference between human beings and the creation. We have a unique portion of responsibility. The responsibility of man is faith. Faith in God's Word. Without faith in God, without faith in the commandment, then there was no way that man could really fulfill his potential. So together, man and God share the same vision and the same goal to actually create a perfect love relationship between God and man. So this is a very different view, actually, because we're saying that man does have responsibility, and therefore the essence of our responsibility is faith, to have faith. When we have faith in God, God can work. When we have faith, God's will is accomplished. And because that is our responsibility, then the possibility exists that we can fail. So if we look at this world, we can see very clearly that man never perfected himself, never multiplied that perfection. Therefore, we can look to the essence of man's problem must have been faith. Man must have lost faith in the very beginning. And if we study religious history, we can see always the central issue is faith. Even Jesus asked in Luke 18:8, when the Son of Man returns, will he find faith on earth? So faith and relationship with God and man achieving our greatest potential go hand in hand. So then let's become people of faith. Faith in God. Thank you very much. God bless you.
And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. Perfection. God, our heavenly parent, creates all things. All things were created for good and destined for perfection. Growth. All things grow to perfection. Growth occurs in 3 stages: formation, growth, and completion. And growth takes time. Human perfection. All creation reaches perfection by the force of principle. Man, however, reaches perfection through the force of principle and by keeping God's commandment. Principle clarifies God's unique gift of free will to man. Man has responsibility to exercise his free will, and together with the force of principled love, to strive to reach individual perfection.
Welcome, everybody. How are you tonight? I'd like to read you something from the 7th chapter of Romans. St. Paul's talking about himself, his own situation. He says, I find in myself a law that when I would do good, evil is present with me. For I delight in the law of God after the inward man. But I see another law in my members, warring against the law of my mind, and bringing me into captivity to the law of sin, which is in my members. O wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me from the body of this death? St. Paul is talking about something that I think we all can relate to. He's talking about the contradiction within us. He says that when I want to do good, suddenly within myself I confront another desire that actually is moving in the opposite direction, to do evil. There's a war going on inside of us. And that war inside of each person is the ultimate cause of the wars that we see in the world. Conflict begins in the individual, in each of us. There is a war, a struggle within the self. A part of us desires to do goodness. Another part of us is following evil. The law of sin. The law of sin is dwelling in us, and therefore contradicts our desire for goodness. The part of us that wants to do good is the original mind of man. The original part of man, or the part that God has created. If we study Genesis, we can see that man's lineage is a little bit confused. Jesus said some pretty harsh things about the lineage of man, didn't he? He said, you're a brood of vipers. You're a bunch of baby snakes. I say, your will is to do the will of your father, the devil. He said, don't say that I'm good. None is good. Only God is good. Something's wrong with man. Man has this contradiction inside of him. And where did it come from? We look to Genesis, and we see that God instructed man to be fruitful, to multiply, and to have dominion. And then he told man, do not eat the fruit. But man disobeyed God. Man disobeyed God, and man fell into sin. So from the very beginning of man, man's first ancestors, we've seen this mix. The desire to obey God, but somehow inheriting this nature to disobey God. The desire to do good, but something also within us that is seeking evil, the way of evil. St. Paul referred to a law of sin that is dwelling within him. Where does this law of sin come from? This law of sin is transmitted through our lineage from the very first sin, our very first ancestors, Adam and Eve. So we want to try to take a look tonight at this law of sin. What is the law of sin? Or the nature of sin? And we're going to take a look at this law of sin and see if we can recognize it. And if we can understand the nature and the law of sin, then maybe we have a little extra armor to deal with sin, to avoid this direction, and maybe we can gain more power to follow the direction of goodness, which also is the direction of true happiness. So we're going to talk about 4 points in the law of sin. The first point in the law of sin is, according to the law of sin, we will have a certain tendency. And our first tendency in the law of sin is that we fail to see life, to see others, to see reality from God's standpoint. We don't see things from God's standpoint. failure to see from God's standpoint. Well, what does that mean? How can we see from God's standpoint? What does it mean to see from God's viewpoint or God's standpoint? It means seeing things the way they really are. Haven't you noticed we look at things in such a way that we can change things around to fit our own emotional feeling or what's good for me? In other words, this means to just boil it down to one statement. This means that we see things from the standpoint of self-interest. God sees things from the standpoint of what's good for others. But we see things from the standpoint of what's good for me first, at the expense of others. Self-interest. Don't we have self-interest? Self-righteousness. Haven't you seen people, they get so righteous when their own interests are involved? When their own interests are involved, oh boy, they get so righteous. They'll stand up in the middle of those committee meetings and just make their statement and speak so strongly, but it's all because their own interests are involved. That's why we have conflict in the world. For instance, it's one reason why the United Nations hasn't been able to really function, hasn't worked. Because every nation is in there based on their own self-interest first. You can't find unity and harmony that way. And in your personal life, you can't find happiness. Self-interest. Let's write that in big letters. Self-interest. We got to get rid of this. Self-interest is the beginning of sin. If you're living your life based on self-interest, you're going to find yourself involved in sin. You're going to divert from God's way because God doesn't see things in terms of his own self-interest. He sees things in terms of what's good for others. So we have to get self-interest out of our hearts if we're going to overcome sin. And that means, well, Jesus spoke about it plainly, you know. He said, don't just love your brethren. Love your enemy. Love the one that's difficult to love. But we don't like to do that, Jesus, because it's difficult. I just want my own clique of associates. I just want to associate with the people that think I'm great. Haven't you noticed that? That you just like to be with the people that like you? And you experiment to see if, well, does this person think I'm great? Have you ever noticed you hate being around people that think you're stupid? Right? Or somebody that just thinks you're not so spectacular. Then you respond, well, I don't like him. He doesn't interest me. But Jesus said, don't be like that. Don't just love your brethren, but love your neighbor. Love everyone. Who's your neighbor? That's everyone. Everyone who's around you. Love indiscriminately. Love your enemy. Love the one that is trying to do evil things to you. Jesus said, be unconditional in your heart. Don't do things out of self-interest, but be unconditional. So how can we overcome the first law of sin? Easiest way, the shortcut. Find that rascal who's been just getting on your nerves for weeks and weeks and weeks. The one that you've been bad-mouthing to everybody. Decide tonight, okay, I'm gonna restore my relationship with this person. I'm gonna find how God loves this person, and I'm gonna love him. That's a quick way to get self-interest out of your heart. Love the one who's most difficult for you to love. And I'm sure you all have many candidates, right? Well, do it. It's the best way to get this first law of sin out of our hearts. What's the second law of sin? Second law of sin is we leave our proper position. Leave leaving our proper position. Well, what does this mean? Leaving our proper position? What is our proper position? Our proper position is sons and daughters of God. This part, that seeks goodness, that seeks godliness. That's our proper self, our proper position. And we have a tendency to leave that position. Our position as the son and daughters of God. What does that mean? What does it really mean when we say you're the son and daughter of God? That means that you see yourself in regards to your relationship with God. You see your value and your identity in terms of how God relates to you, what God thinks about you. And that's why to be arrogant is so foolish, because God's opinion of you is 1,000 times higher than the most arrogant person, the most arrogant attitude. Actually, God's attitude about you, his opinion, is so high. So staying in our proper position is relating to God in such a way that we see ourselves, our value, our identity within the context of God's love and forgiveness. But how easy we give that up. How easy we leave our proper position and let other things tell us who we are. What's an example? I was standing on the subway platform a few months ago, and a guy just came walking up to me for no reason and just spit all over me. A big one. And this big wad just hit me, threw it down my neck. The people around me looked at me like I had the plague, you know. And for a second, I was just about ready to leave my proper position. And I was going to leave it all over his head. Haven't you noticed how easily you get upset and get angry if somebody mistreats you? You know why that happens? It's because you forget that you're the son and daughter of God. And so when somebody else tells you, you're no good, I hate your guts, you're crazy, you're bad, you stink, you're nothing, you're no good, we believe it so fast. And when we believe it, then we leave our proper position. We're letting something else, unoriginal, tell us who we are, when actually God is always with us, saying we are his sons and daughters. Don't leave your proper position. If something bad happens, if that taxi cab pulls out in front of you and cuts you off, don't start cussing and yelling. Don't forget who you are. You're the son and daughter of God. And that's an unchanging value. Don't leave your proper position. So if we don't leave our proper position, then when people mistreat us, instead of getting mad and feeling we got to punch somebody in the nose, then we find God's way. We can forgive. We can always be a true person. Just like Jesus on the cross, he could forgive. So the second law of sin, leaving our proper position. Let's don't do that. The third law of sin is reversal of order. Reversal of order. The reversal of order has taken place. There's a nature of sin to reverse priorities, to reverse the order of things. And this results from the fall. We studied about the archangel leaving his position. Jude 6 and 7 talks about the angels leaving their position and dominating man. This has come to us through the lineage. The most dramatic expression is the relationship of our spirit and body. Your spirit should be the catalyst of the action of your body. Your body should just respond to the pursuit of your spiritual purpose in life. Your spiritual purpose is to love others, to give to others, to live for others. But how that's changed? Exactly what St. Paul was talking about. The body is dominating the pursuit of our heart, of our spirit. So the result is we're 10 times, maybe 1,000 times more aware of our physical needs than we are of our spiritual needs. Isn't it true? Whenever you missed a meal, or God forbid, missed 2 meals, then you just go crazy. Oh my God, I missed dinner. Hey, I'm hungry. Your stomach just starts growling and churning and making noise. Blah, blah. Just miss 1 meal and you really become aware of it, don't you? But how many times have we gone for a week without a word of prayer? How many times have we gone a week without communing and fellowshipping in God's love? How many times have we gone a week or 2 weeks and haven't really read God's Word? And we didn't feel a thing. We didn't feel a thing. This is because of a tremendous reversal of order. Actually, your spirit is the eternal part of yourself, and this is the part of ourself that is most foreign to us. It's very clear. There's a tremendous reversal of order. And that means in our life, we have a tendency to choose physical priorities over spiritual priorities. Don't make that mistake. Let's reorder this situation, and let's focus on our spiritual priorities first and our physical priorities secondly, in an objective way. Fourth, law of sin. Sin will multiply. Sin multiplies. Sin will multiply. Sin must multiply and expand. It has a nature to do it. And you know how it does? When you sin, what happens? You feel guilty. Your conscience strikes you. There's 2 things that you can do. You can resolve your sin, or you can repress it by self-justification. And which way do we usually take? Well, let me justify myself. It's easy. It's much easier. It's much easier to just justify my actions than to say, I'm wrong and I have to change. It's because it's easier that sin has a nature to multiply in ourselves and amongst others. Haven't you noticed when there's 5 people that want to do something, but the 6th one says, no, that's not right. I don't think we should do that. They'll break their back trying to get that one person to join them in their sin. This is human nature. Haven't you noticed how you work on yourself when you have that choice? Oh, I shouldn't do this. Isn't it easy to justify your action? We have all certain ways that we do it. I don't want to give you any secrets that you might use, but one that works really good is, oh, go ahead, once won't hurt. Doesn't that work good? It's amazing. Every sinful habit began with a once that wouldn't hurt. Another one that works is, oh, don't you know? Everybody's doing it. Oh, everybody's doing it? Well, I didn't know. Well, let me do it too. Funny thing was, everybody was doing it, but it was always me that got caught. I just couldn't figure that out. Don't justify yourself, because this is how sin multiplies. So face the truth. Let your conscience be struck with the truth, and then resolve your sin. And the way we resolve our sin is we confess. We confess, we repent for our sin, and then we pledge not to do it again. That's the way. So these 4 laws of sin, if we really work on these and become aware of them and notice how really that is the law that's working in me, inside of me, internally, then it will give us strength to be able to battle this contradiction inside of myself, this direction that constantly moves me to the side of evil action. If we become aware of the law of sin, then we have a weapon. Then when you take one step, oh yeah, I'm doing just like what Kevin McCarthy said. Boy, that's really true. That law of sin is just exact for each one of us. We've inherited the same nature. We've inherited that same nature. So if we understand the law of sin that God has given us and apply it, then we can have more confidence and more strength to follow the way of our original mind and heart, to be good people, God-centered people. Let's be God-centered, good people, and let's love each other, and let's love our Heavenly Father. Thank you very much, and God bless you.
The law of sin. First, failure to see from God's standpoint. Second, leaving our proper position as God's child. Third, reversal of proper order. And fourth, multiplication of sin. And now we will see two excerpts from speeches given by Reverend Moon. First, at graduation ceremonies at the Unification Theological Seminary. And second, more informally, on his birthday in 1984. Here in America, Reverend Moon seldom wears anything but American clothes, but on that occasion, he chose to appear to members in traditional Korean dress. He spoke very intimately on his aspirations for them. And now, at Unification Theological Seminary.
From the point of view of the family, sons and daughters who love and serve their parents for the benefit of the entire family are called children of filial piety. From the point of view of the pure nation, citizens who love and serve their country are called loyal patriots. From a global point of view, people who love and serve all of mankind are called saints. And from the cosmic point of view, those who love and serve heaven as well as mankind are called holy sons and daughters of God. In the Unification Church, our goal is to become holy sons and daughters of God. 그래서
You follow.
모닝 젊은이는 현재 미국 젊은이와 다르다.
The Mooney young people of Mooney are different from ordinary Mooney.
어때?
Are you different young people? Yes or no?
여기 의자 나온 말이야. 여기 한 300명, 400명, 한 1000명 이상이 들었는데 이렇게 앉은 거에 안수는 환영했어?
So, with the chairs in this room, probably 300-400 people fill the auditorium. In this way, we can accommodate about 1,500 people right away. And when you sit down this way, initially, what did you say? Did you welcome it? Did you reject it? Did you sort of complain in your heart?
Welcome to the right situation on now. In the beginning.
In the beginning. Did you welcome this culture? Yes or no?
가서 여자 앉아가지고 있어. 다리야 이거 다리야 이거.
I'm sure all of you thought in the beginning, boy, what kind of church is this? Where's the chair? Where's the pier? You know? Where's the cushion? You know? And when you go to other churches, there's a really fluffy cushion, and it make you, you know, comfortably sleep. Let you sleep very well.
그렇기 때문에 이제 이렇게 하면 말하면 미국의 젊은 문의들은 아시아 사람 앉아서 교육받는 곳에 가서도 지도자가 될 수 있는 자격이 따졌다.
So since you're trained already, this has become, this kind of way of life become your tradition. So even you American or the Westerners, you go to Asian culture, you can become a leader. You don't feel strange. Those mingling with the people who are for several thousand years sitting on the floor. You can mingle with them and know strangeness.
어디 계시죠? 미국식까지 의자맨들이야 내가 앉을 줄 알지. 탁상 놓고 설교해야 설교지. 이와 같은 거 싫다 할 수 있는 입장에선 그런 미국식 교회 지도자, 저 문의식 교회 지도자가 있다면 아시아에서 얻은 것이 환영받겠네요.
So let's say there's a two type of missionaries go to Asia. One go to Asia say, well, in our culture I need a chair, I need a desk, I need cushion, I need the summertime air conditioning. You know, then I can start preach the gospel. That's one type. Those will say, well, your culture is my culture. I can live within your culture and mingle just like you do now. Which kind of missionary would be welcome?
First one, second. I insist.
Father surrendered on his birthday.
그다음에 너들은 문의 등에는 언제나 슬림백 지구대. 가야 잘 때는 침대가 어디서 침대? 저 모텔에 가지고 그 슬림백이 다 구로대면 자니까 저 담백에 붙어 가까이 펴놓고 들어가자고 이런 슬림백 종류밖에 모른다.
So we have also another culture, sleeping bag culture. So back of every moonie has a bag of sleeping bag, and when you go into a room and on a lounge in a hotel room, it doesn't make a difference. You don't look for any bed, you know. Yeah, all you have to do is just to find a little corner that flip yourself inside the sleeping bag. You already create your own kingdom there.
이렇게 훈련 때는 너희들은 아프리카든 뭐 아시아든 안 통할 수 없는 훈련이 되겠다고.
So this is another kind of training, culture training. And if you are accustomed to it, it becomes a tradition. Wherever you go, that is Asia or Africa, it doesn't make a difference. You don't feel any strangeness anywhere under the sun.
지금까지 기성교 선교사들 가게 되면 그 선교사철 만들고 이러고 살고 있는데 문의 선교사 전혀 없다고. 문의 선교사는 백인 어디 가냐면 그 선교사들 제일 나쁜 집에 가 사는 것이 문의 선교사.
So conventionally, when you go to the underdeveloping country, and when you look at the missionary houses, they are the special class of people, special area, special building, special kind of furniture, and the toilet and the bathroom. That's the way. Without it, they cannot do the missionary work. But now, in a new age, they're looking for Unification missionary home. They're not going to have any special places. They're going to find themselves in the lowest possible, ghetto area, hot. And there, Unification mission can be found. That's the market differences.
미국 사람 선교사들은 미국을 중심 삼고 그런 영어로 그 지방 사람은 그런 선교사들.
Maybe the first kind of mission, you need everything to do the mission. That might be working here in this country, but it'll permanently remain foreign when you go to other cultures. They will not accept that kind of mission.
우는 사람이 친구가 되려면 울 줄 알아야 친구가 되고, 우는 사람을 가르치려면 울게 할 줄 알아야 돼. 울게 할 줄 알지 않으면 가르칠 수 없는 거예요.
So, if you want to proselytize, you want to bring the gospel to the sad people, the crying people, you got to have a crying heart first place. If you want to bring the comfort to the saddened person, unless you would be inside the depths of that sadness, you would not comfort that person. That's the criteria.
친구가 되기 위해서는 같이 울어줘야 되고, 가르쳐주기 위해서는 울게 할 줄 알 수 있는 내용이, 울릴 수 있는 내용이 있어야 됩니다. 그래서 지도자가 되려면.
So So those who are crying, in order to comfort him, you have to cry together. 또 하나는 아버님은 또 하나는
그 사람들을 지도하기 위해서는 울게 할 수 있는 내용이죠.
in order to lead them, teach them and educate them, you should be able to move their heart. Let them cry out in inspiration.
하나님은 그런 분이라 하나님은 만민의 울음의 친구 될 수 있고 울게 할 수 있는 입장에서기 때문에 하나님의 권위를 증거할 수 있다는 사실을 알고 있습니다.
God is that kind of personality. God always cries together those who are crying. God always gives crying in order to educate them and let them see the depth of heart.
선교사로서 그 나라의 지도자가 될 겁니다.
Otherwise, you would not become a missionary, become a leader of that particular country.
그러면 미국 올 때 미국 국민과 더불어 같이 울 수 있느냐 같이 울어야 된다. 뿐만이 아니라 웃고 있는 미국 순을 모아다 울게 만들 수 있는 그럴 수 있느냐 그럴 수 있지 않으면 미국에 영향을 줄 수 없다고 봤다.
When Father came to America as a missionary, when Father came to this country as a missionary, Father knew that Father would be in a position to cry together those suffering people of America.